A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillah, today we shall continue this translation series. Today we will cover chapter number 2, Surah Baqarah, verse number 256 to 271. Inshallah, for the first about 5 minutes we will do the actual English translation of these verses, and then inshallah we will discuss some of these verses. So let's start. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. There shall be no compulsion in religion. The right way has become distinct from the wrong way. Whoever renounces evil and believes in God has grasped the most trustworthy handle, which does not break. God is hearing and knowing. God is the Lord of those who believe. He brings them out of darkness and into light. As for those who disbelieve, their lords are the evil ones. They bring them out of light and into darkness. These are the inmates of the fire in which they will abide forever. Have you not considered him who argued with Abraham about his Lord, because God has given him sovereignty? Abraham said, My Lord is he who gives life and causes death. He said, I give life and cause death. Abraham said, God brings the sun from the east, so bring it from the west. So the blasphemer was confounded. God does not guide the wrongdoing people. Or like the one who passed by a town collapsed on its foundation, he said, How can God revive this after its demise? Thereupon God caused him to die for 100 years and then resurrected him. He said, For how long have you been dead? He said, I have been dead for a day or part of a day. He said, No, you have been dead for 100 years. Now look at your food and your drink, it has not spoiled. And look at your donkey, we will make you a wonder for mankind. And look at the bones, how we arrange them and then clothe them with flesh. So when it became clear to him, he said, I know that God has power over all things. And when Abraham said, My Lord, show me how you give life to the dead, he said, Have you not believed? He said, Yes, but to put my heart at ease. He said, Take your 4 birds and incline them to yourself, then place a part on each hill, then call to them and they will come rushing to you, and know that God is powerful and wise. The parable of those who spend their wealth in God's way is that of a grain that produces 7 spikes. In each spike is 100 grains. God multiplies for whom he wills. God is bounteous and knowing. Those who spend their wealth in the way of God and then do not follow up what they spend with reminders of their generosity or with insults, they will have their reward with their Lord. They have nothing to fear, nor shall they grieve. Kind words and forgiveness are better than charity followed by insults. God is rich and clement. O you who believe, do not nullify your charitable deeds with reminders and hurtful words, like him who spends his wealth to be seen by people and does not believe in God and the last day. His likeness is that of a smooth rock covered with soil. A downpour strikes it and leaves it bare. They gain nothing from their efforts. God does not guide the disbelieving people. And the parable of those who spend their wealth seeking God's approval and to strengthen their souls is that of a garden on a hillside. If heavy rains fall on it, its produces is double, and if no heavy rain falls, dew is enough. God is seeing of everything you do. Would any one of you like to have a garden of palms and vines under which rivers flow, with all kinds of fruit in it for him? An old age has stricken him, and he has weak children. Then a tornado with fire batters it, and it burns down. Thus God makes clear the signs for you so that you may reflect. O you who believe, give of the good things you have earned and from what we have produced for you from the earth, and do not pick the inferior things to give away when you yourself would not accept it except with eyes closed, and know that God is sufficient and praiseworthy. Satan promises you poverty and urges you to immorality, but God promises you forgiveness from himself and grace. God is embracing and knowing. He gives wisdom to whoever he wills. Whoever is given wisdom has been given much good, but none pays heed except those with insight. Whatever charity you give or a pledge you fulfill, God knows it. The wrongdoers have no helpers. If you give charity openly, that is good, but if you keep it secret and give it to the needy in private, that is better for you. It will atone for some of your misdeeds. God is cognizant of what you do. Alhamdulillah, we have finished the translation of today's verses, verse number 256 to 271 of chapter number 2, Surah Baqarah. Now let's start discussion on these verses. But as usual, before our discussion, I would like to remind and re-emphasize that this Let's Live Quran series is dedicated for common Muslims, common people with common intelligence, common understanding, and common literacy level. Same is the case with me. I am not an alim, I am not a scholar, I am not a hafiz. I just try to spend some time with Quran Pak, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us what we are seeking from Quran Pak. So we don't need an alim, we don't need a scholar, we don't need a hafiz who would teach us or mentor us through Quran Pak. It's very easy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us in chapter number 54, 4 times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeated that I have made Quran Pak easy for anyone who wants to understand it and who wants to reflect on it. So it's very easy to say, and it seems very convincing when some of the people, some of the alims, and some of the what we call Maulanas, they say, oh, if you need something from gold, you have to go to a goldsmith. If you need something from iron, you have to go to a blacksmith. So if you need to learn something for Islam or from Quran, you have to go to an alim. This is all very tempting, convincing words only. They have no meaning, they have no reality. Quran Pak and the right way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is second nature of human being. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made humans based on this nature. It's just like we don't need to go to someone to learn how to breathe. We don't need to go to someone to learn how to eat. We don't need to go to someone how to drink, and we don't need to go to someone to learn how to talk and how to walk and how to touch and how to do all these basic human nature things. Now similarly, Quran Pak and the knowledge coming out of Quran Pak is second nature of human being. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it a nature of a human being. So as soon as we will start learning it in the language we understand on our own, we will immediately get the benefit which we are looking for, and the minimum guaranteed benefit we will get is we will understand the basic requirements of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Islam, and the basic requirements of being a basic Muslim. But of course, if we want to have a deep dive, if we want to really become an alim and hafiz and extracts the deep knowledge of Quran Pak, for that we need to not only on our own do it again and again, but we may need to also seek mentorship from someone who has spent more time with Quran Pak, but it's not a requirement. Alright, so let's start today's verses. So first of all, in verse 256, very critical sentence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, there shall be no compulsion in religion. The right way has become distinct from the wrong way. Whoever renounces evil and believes in God has grasped the most trustworthy handle, which does not break. God is hearing and knowing. So this is a very critical aspect. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that there is no compulsion in religion. And in other words, there is no compulsion in Islam. So first of all, it also clarifies the fact that in some Islamic culture and societies, the backward Islamic cultures and societies, there is this concept of using force to convert people into Islam. That is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying here. Of course, there are within an Islamic country, there are certain rules and regulations which must be followed by everyone. But use of force is not allowed. It's clearly written in this verse, in verse number 256. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that it should be based on our free will. If somebody wants to become a Muslim, it should be his or her own action based on free will. We cannot force someone to do that. And similarly, if somebody doesn't want to listen to us, doesn't want to accept Islam, doesn't want to follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance, then also we don't have to worry about it. Because later on we will see in Quran Pak, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even told Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that if you think that you can convert people, anyone you want to Islam, that's not your job, and that's not in your power, and you cannot do that. That's only something which I do, being the Lord, being the Allah. So that's not possible. So we have to leave people on their own to see who wants to be a true Muslim, who wants to be a Mu'min, who wants to be a Muslim if they are non-Muslims. But of course, what is important is to try to bring the right message to everyone by spreading the word of Quran, by spreading the knowledge of Islam. But there is no concept of using force. All right, in 257, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about that as for those who disbelieve, their lords are evil ones. They bring them out of light and into darkness. These are the inmates of the fire in which they will abide forever. So this is the ultimate weapon of Satan, that Satan will always try to pull us towards the temptations of this life. So in other words, without knowing, subconsciously we will move from the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ultimate salvation and success of the permanent life of hereafter. We will move into darkness without even knowing, subconsciously, because this is the way how Satan works. Then in 258, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about this story where the Prophet Abraham was talking to this king, and he said, my Lord gives life and death, and he said, I give life and death. And then Abraham said, my Lord takes out sun from the east, you take the sun out from the west. So then the point to note in this verse is that this king, although he was speechless, although in his heart he realized that perhaps Abraham is saying the right thing, but it was his ego, his stubbornness, and his superiority complex, and his pride that stopped him from saying that, okay, you are right. So this ego is the ultimate, another weapon of Satan. Its ego is the ultimate problem with humans. This prideness and ego, this results in stubbornness. And as I always say, once a person becomes stubborn and egoistic, then no matter what we say and no matter how this person feels and believes inside in his or her heart, they will never, on the face of it, they will never change their version. They will never listen to anything, no matter how factual we are. As I always say, the analogy is, or the example is, that if it's 1 p.m. and we can see sun and we can see it's 1 p.m., it's a fact. But if somebody out of stubbornness says, no, I don't agree, this is 1 a.m., it's the night time, and if this person insists on it and rejects all the facts, bright sunlight and sun and everything, even that's the extreme situation. You cannot change this person. They are just deaf, dumb and blind, as we have been seeing throughout Quran Sharif. So this is the situation with non-Muslims as well as Muslims for namesake only and hypocrite Muslims. They have their own version of faith and understanding, and they will not change because of ego. Even if they deep inside their heart, sometimes they feel that they may be wrong, they will not accept it because of their ego, what we call nak in Urdu, and they will not change or listen to anything because of their stubbornness. Then in verse number 260, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is again narrating the story when Prophet Abraham said, my Lord, show me how you give life to the dead. So the point to note over here is that it's not easy to believe in the unseen. It's not easy to believe in everything which we don't see. It's not easy to have iman on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on the last day, on hell and heaven, because we don't see these things. And this is in itself is a big test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our iman in itself is a big test. for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He wants to see that blindly who is there, despite the fact that we have our intelligence, we have our understanding, we have our own human wisdom, and we have our senses. Despite all this, who is there who will believe in me, in my Lordship, and who will believe in the unseen, just because I am saying that there is me, there is hell, there is heaven, there will be day of judgment. So similarly, Prophet Abraham just wanted to be extremely firm in his heart, and he wanted to see a sign to believe how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring death to life. And then this story happened. And then from verse number 261 to right till 267, it's all about charity, charity, and charity. These are one of the most comprehensive verses on this topic of charity. We have talked about it in previous videos. We will continue to talk about it in future videos as well. Because as I always say, prayers and charity, these are the two things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has talked the most in Quran Pak, more than 100 times. And without these two things, a Muslim cannot be a Muslim. So first of all, in verse 261, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about that those who spend their wealth in God's way is that of a grain that produces 7 spikes. In each spike is 100 grains. So over here the point to note is that although charity is supposed to be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without any greed, but even for a person who may be business minded, based on this verse number 265, these people also should appreciate the fact that charity is also a great business, because you cannot get the return from any business in this world as well as in the life hereafter what you get from charity. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying it's like if you give charity, it's like you have one seed, and out of that seed 7 grains come out, spikes come out, and from each spout there are 100. So it's like unlimited reward. So even when we spend money in charity in this life, we will see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not only returns what we have spent in charity, but actually He gives much more, many times more than what we have actually spent, and sometimes from the sources which we cannot even believe. So it's a great deal, great trade for this life as well as for the life hereafter. And then, of course, from 262, 263, 264 and all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also saying that do charity. When you do charity, when you help needy people, when you do your duties towards your families and all, and on top of that, when you do charity and you give to other needy people, or you spend in any other cause for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it all should be done in a very graceful manner. We cannot boast about it. We cannot tell people or pressurize people or put people under stress who we have helped, and we cannot remind these acts of charitable acts. So everything has to be done in a very, very graceful manner. That's the charity which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not only accepts and appreciates, but that's the charity for which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives returns manifold in this life as well as in the life hereafter. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in verse number 267, it's one of the most critical aspects of charity in Quran Pak, this verse number 267, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, O you who believe, give of the good thing you have earned and from what we have produced for you from the earth. So over here the critical point to note it that this is one verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned charity and requirement of spending from what we earn. So the word used over here is our earnings, not our savings. Because generally people have this misconception that charity, if we do zakat, that's enough. But we have to understand zakat is on savings, it's not on earnings. And charity is supposed to be on earning. That's why charity is a much bigger concept compared to zakat. Zakat is a subset of charity concept. So over here clearly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that give of the good things you have earned. And also if there is a farmer who produces from earth, do farming, so they have to spend out of what they produce out of that farming. So it's critical to note that we have to spend out of our earnings and not wait till we can save enough money and then do zakat. So the analogy is if we have a salary of say $10,000 or 10 lakhs rupees, after paying taxes and all that, if we end up with suppose 700,000 rupees as our after tax salary, we have to take out some charity out of that money. We cannot say though I earned 700,000, it's not enough for me. Every month I have more expenses and last week of the month I am out of money and my salary is keeping me hand to mouth. No, these are all excuses, lame excuses I would say. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects us to spend out of charity, and just like we give income tax on our salaries, we have to assume some percentage, however small, 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, whatever we can take out, we have to take out in charity. And that's the concept, and that's the right concept, and that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is emphasizing in this verse number 267, where he says give of the good things you have earned. It's absolutely critical. And then in 268 again Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about this very popular weapon of Satan. Satan promises you poverty and urges you immorality, but God promises you forgiveness from himself. So of course Shaitan, what we call Satan, he will always say when we want to do any charity, he will say, oh, you yourself are struggling, you're hand to mouth, you don't have money, you will become poor, how can you give to other people? So this is the concept, but of course the only exception, only person who may not give in charity is the person who actually has no earnings. But anyone who is receiving any money from any source, they are supposed to take out some percentage, however small, in the cause of Allah. And to be honest, strictly speaking, the concept should be so strict that, for example, even if a beggar is collecting every day 100 rupees out of begging, ideally and strictly speaking, he or she should also spend maybe 1 rupee out of that 100 rupee and give it to some fellow beggar as charity. Similarly, if somebody is receiving some help from anywhere in any form or shape, they are also supposed to take out some money and give it to some cause, in Allah's cause. So the charity is supposed to be on any collection, no matter from where it has come, whether it has come from our own earnings or it has come from some help or some other source. There must be some share of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala which must be passed on to other needy people. And then in 269 Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about he gives wisdom to whoever he wills. Whoever is given wisdom has been given much good. Now over here the point to note is that the wisdom is not necessarily what we think of, this worldly knowledge and worldly what we call education and all the degrees where we become lawyer and doctor and chartered accountant and physician and engineers and mathematicians and professors and everything, and we become very proud of this knowledge. This is not necessarily the wisdom. Of course this is also very valuable, but wisdom is more important when it comes to the wisdom in the matters of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's faith and religion and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge, the Quran Pak, the authentic hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and other Islamic knowledge. But no Islamic knowledge is important enough or good enough or can be given more priority than the starting point, which is the Quran Pak. So first one should understand the Quran Pak. And I must also mention, it's Quran Pak, it's absolutely critical to understand Quran Pak in the language we understand and rely on some authentic translation. So and that should be our priority, to understand translation. Some people, their priority is sometimes different. Their priority is, for example, some people will start doing the hifz of Quran Pak without fully even understanding the translation of Quran Pak. So that priority has to be seen. Of course, being Hafiz is an extremely blessed thing, but without a first understanding the Quran Pak in the language which we understand, we just try to memorize the whole Quran without understanding it fully. That's the wrong setting up of priorities. It should be in the natural flow of things. First, we need to understand how to read Quran Pak in Arabic. Then we should understand its translation in the language in which we understand. Once we are comfortable with that, then may Allah give us the capability to, inshallah, even memorize Quran Pak and be an Hafiz. So this wisdom is critical in the knowledge of the life hereafter as well. It's absolutely important. And then again in 270 and 271, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about charity again. That whatever you give, I am aware of that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in 271 is saying, if you give charity openly, that is good, but if you give it secretly, that's even better. So of course that's a fact that of charity giving in the open when other people are aware of it, some people prefer that, but that's also fine. But as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying in this verse, it's better if you give it secretly, because that has the underlying intention that it is strictly between the person and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The intent is not to show off. The intent is not to let the whole world know that, oh, I am doing all this good work and I am doing charity. That's not the intention. It is supposed to be absolutely pure, only and only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure, and only to fulfill the basic duty and requirement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is to spend in charity. So alhamdulillah, with this we have finished today's verses. We have come to the end of this video, and before finishing this video, as usual, I will say the same things which I always say, that whether we are billionaires or beggars or anyone in between, unless our focus and our efforts are for the success of the permanent life of hereafter, we are the most dumb and the biggest failure. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us an opportunity to become a basic Muslim, and after becoming a basic Muslim, to continue this journey and become an ultimate mu'min, inshallah. Allah Hafiz.